Hey everybody, Dr. Dan. So this week we're into chapter 23, which is about World War I. And this is a real interesting time, and it's difficult as we read our book and go through these lectures to make the connections to as what's going on. And I don't want this to feel disconnected, although world history is always disconnected because there's just too much to grasp at one time often. But maybe a real quick review. So last week we were talking about Asia, and I'm sure you don't remember, but the Qing dynasty collapsed in 1911. So you have this new thing happening in China. And then in that same chapter, we read about the Meiji Restoration in Japan. So, that happens in the late 1800s. So Japan is rapidly modernizing into the 1900s. And then we start chapter 23, which is about World War I. So, this stuff is all happening in the early 1900s as well. And it's... I think if you take all of those things together, sort of, in a holistic approach, that you can say, well, there's a lot going on in the world. And you can think about that. You can say, why are things happening the way they're happening? Why are they happening now? And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Certainly industrialization and this rise of capitalism and sort of the maturity of colonialism, I guess, is happening. But at the same time, this intense nationalism that's been going on with the rise of communication. I mean, the history books don't talk about that, but nationalism thrives on communication. And communication, not so much like, telephones and telegraphs, that's part of it, but even transportation is communication early on. So nationalism forms as people communicate with each other, and this public identity or public sphere starts to rise in all of these countries. And it can be based on nationality, it can be based on common geography, it certainly, is always based on religion to some extent, language, that sort of thing. So nationalist forces in all of the countries involved in World War I certainly get this war started, the war to end all wars, or the Great War, I think it was at this time. And again, we're seeing a real transition in warfare too. Now, I'm not a military guy, but as you all know, industrial warfare that involves things like machine guns and modern weaponry. The weapons came before the tactics. In other words, a lot of the armies in the 1800s, and that was evident in the Civil War here in the United States, they didn't really know how to fight against machine guns and against high-powered rifles. So these tactics of charging, men going into a line, and now they're getting mowed down with machine guns. So there's this weird transition between industrial modern weapons of war, yet old tactics and old techniques, and that's certainly the case in World War I as well. So a lot there, but you've probably heard, the expression, the shot heard around the world. And that's when Archduke Francis Ferdinand, who was Austrian, was shot by a Serbian, and Austria and Serbia had no love for each other, and there were also alliances going on. So Serbia is in the Balkans, and the Balkans are an area that is south of Austria that also border on Russia and border on the Black Sea. So it's valuable real estate for Russia. So Russia has an interest in Serbia, and Austria has an interest in Serbia because Austria-Hungary, that empire, controls Serbia, and Serbia doesn't like it. And the Germans are allied with the Austrians. So already we have complicated stuff going on. But when a Serbian assassinates an Austrian prince, that's when the trouble starts. And so the Serbians are aligned with the Russians. So the Russians go to war to protect Serbians, basically, and the Austrians are aligned with the Germans, so the Germans enter the war, and the war starts between the Germans and the Russians, and that's the beginning of World War I. And it's a deadly war, especially on the Western Front. Now, the Eastern Front is, Russia, Germany, Austria, that area. And there's a map in MindTap in your book that you can see where the Eastern Front is. And the Eastern Front is very much open warfare in open fields. And it's one of the reasons for that is that Eastern Front, that border is so long. Now, in the Western Front, and now I'm talking about France, basically. In France, there's trench warfare going on with the Germans, and one of the reasons that trench warfare emerges as a tactic issue, if you will, is first of all because these areas in Europe, these borders in France are a lot smaller, so there's no chance of doing any kind of flanking moves from a military standpoint. But also these areas are a lot more populated, and movement is harder. Plus, with modern warfare and modern, armaments like mortars, trench warfare becomes the thing you do, because really the military tacticians at this point in time, you can't call in the cavalry when the other team has machine guns and these machine gun concrete enforced boxes set up everywhere. So the bottom line is, when the war starts on the Western Front, and when the Germans fight the French, and when the Germans certainly fight the English at like the Battle of the Somme and Battle of the Marne, these are just deadly affairs where 60, 70,000 guys will lose their lives in a day because of machine guns. And if you want to learn this, look up trench warfare. Just look it up at Wikipedia, if you will, and you'll see plenty of pictures. But the book describes how terrible the trenches were, and how they went miles and miles and miles. So like anthills, sort of halfway on top of ground, and full of dead and dying men and limbs and dirt and mud and people getting blown up. But you're sticking your head up from there with your rifle and trying to shoot the other guy. And occasionally the general would say charge, and these guys, English or German, would all get out of their trench and get into the open field, what they called no man's land, and the machine guns would just mow everybody down. So a pretty dreadful war, and that's what World War I is known for, this trench warfare. And again, basically, it was the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance. There's different names, Grand Entente, Grand Alliance, but the bottom line is the Western powers were on one side, so that's Great Britain, France, and Russia, and the United States eventually. And then on the other side were the Germans, Austrians, and Italians, although the Italians would kind of pull out early. So that's what the war was all about. And it was really... It really started over the interest of the land in the Balkans, and then because of nationalist forces and other forces, accelerated into something far bigger and longer than anyone thought it would be. I mean, it ended up killing like 9 million guys. So a big deal. And the war was terrible enough in itself, but while the war is going on in 1917, because the war ends in 1918, but in 1917 the Russian Revolution starts, and so that's really a big thing too, because Russia's a major player in the war. And actually, Germany is really happy that the Russian Revolution started when it did, because it pulled Russia out of the Eastern Front, so it allowed them to concentrate a little bit more on the Western Front, which didn't work, but that's what their thought was at the time. And so, the Russian Revolution is going on in the middle of World War I. So why is the Russian Revolution important? Well, it's important because communism comes to Russia during that time span between 1917 and 1921. And the Tsar is the old ruler. The Tsar is like a king, so the Tsar has ruled Russia forever. The Tsar's wife actually is German in this case, the queen, if you will. And the Tsar is overthrown and eventually killed by radicals and by peasants who are starving and who are unhappy with the old order and are unhappy with the fact that like 5 million of their men went off to war and died. So the country is really ripe for revolution, and one thing leads to another. Lenin, who is a big Marxist, if you will, or communist, comes into the country and rises up with the Bolsheviks, which is a Soviet. It's a local council of comprised of workers and other type political types, if you will. So the Bolsheviks are a Soviet or a local grouping. I think they come out of Petrograd. Actually, I'm wrong. They don't come out of Petrograd. I think they come out of Moscow, but one or the other. There's two Soviets that rise up and get together. You'll read about it because Trotsky is in charge of one of them and Lenin's in charge of the other one. So you'll read all about this, and one thing leads to another, and the communists or the Bolsheviks overtake the eventual provisional government in Russia in 1921. So now you have communist Russia. Well, that happened at the same time World War I was happening. But of course, the Russian Civil War that sort of seals the Bolsheviks' fate as the ones in power ends in 1921, and the armistice to end World War I actually is in 1918. So all around the same time. But the point is, there's a heck of a lot going on, and as the book goes through this, it talks all about the Russian Revolution, and then it's got a section called An Uncertain Peace. And I mean, this is classic history, whether it's American history or world history. The fact that the Treaty of Versailles to end World War I comes along, and the Germans are fined, or they have to pay these great reparations as a result of the war, and they also have to admit their war guilt, and that doesn't suit well with the Germans at all. And actually, the reparations represent so much money that there's no way it could ever be paid back. But really, France and Great Britain really wanted to punish the Germans for World War I. They felt that the Germans started World War I. They were responsible for World War I. And France especially was very aggressive about wanting Germany to pay back for all the losses in the war. So there's no love during the Treaty of Versailles or the armistice, and so when the war ends, it ends in a situation where Germany's not happy at all, and the rest of the countries are counting on Germany to pay them back. But then while that's all going on, in the middle of everything else, the Great Depression starts, and that's an international, a global, or at least Western event that affects Europe and certainly affects Germany and the U.S. More than anyone else. And turns out Germany can't pay their reparations back, and German people start starving, and they're out of work, and they're unemployed, which leaves them vulnerable for someone else to come along, maybe say Hitler. And in the U.S. during the same time, again, people are unemployed, starving, and everything else because of the Great Depression. And FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, comes along with the New Deal and gives the country hope, if you will. So the U.S. wasn't really as vulnerable to a fascist or a dictator taking over because of Roosevelt and the New Deal, and just sort of a different environment here. So that's sort of the chain of events. There's a lot going on here, but the thing we have to remember as we get out of this chapter is it ends with Germany being defeated, Germany being angry, Germany feeling that the war wasn't really over. And so again, it's important to understand that when societies are unemployed and starving and not happy, that they're vulnerable to someone coming in and making big promises. I mean, we all are. Our politicians make us big promises all the time. I think that's the best takeaway. The chapter ends with a little bit about cultural and intellectual trends. And, anytime you have a war and a depression and an event that truly affects a lot of people, then art and literature changes. And certainly after World War I, the idea of surrealism and the Dada movement and some of these other movements in art that reflect a vision of reality that isn't real. It's surreal all of a sudden, and it's just artists expressing either their observations to a world that's fallen into disarray, or their disdain for war, or all of the above. So it's a nice ending to this chapter, and interestingly also, it talks about the rise of mass culture through movies, and how Hollywood is booming, and how paperbacks are going crazy. And ironically, that mass culture in any society, rebuilds this sense of nationalism, and then nationalism sort of gets you into the next cycle for potential war, which is exactly what's going to happen. So I hope you enjoyed a chapter. It was a good one. It wasn't too terribly long. We don't have a quiz this week. We don't have an assignment this week, so you don't have to worry about anything for right now. And I'll see you again next week. Take care. Bye-bye.